In the winter of 1869, a high-ranking officer in the United States military made a comment that would change the American West forever. He didn't talk about ammunition or troop movements. Instead, he spoke about the buffalo. He said the army should shoot them until they became too scarce to support the people who lived there. This was a new kind of warfare. It wasn't fought with bullets alone, but with hunger. For the Native American nations of the 1800s, food was not just something you ate to survive. It was a masterpiece of engineering. It was a biological engine that provided more security than almost any European system of the time. Most people today imagine the people of the Old West as simple hunters moving from place to place. But the truth is much more impressive. They were master agronomists and chemists who managed millions of acres of land. They turned vast ecosystems into high-density calorie factories. They created superfoods that were virtually indestructible and engineered subterranean vaults that kept grain fresh for years. Today, we are going to look at the incredible science of how these nations actually lived, the hidden technologies they used to thrive in harsh landscapes, and the strategic way those food systems were eventually targeted to change the course of history. To understand how these nations stayed so healthy, you have to look at the Three Sisters. This was a polyculture system of corn, beans, and squash. It sounds simple, but it was actually a biological machine. The corn grew tall to provide a structural trellis. The climbing beans used that trellis to reach the sun, and in exchange, they pulled nitrogen from the air and fixed it into the soil to feed the corn. On the ground, the large prickly leaves of the squash acted as a living mulch. They shaded the dirt to keep moisture in and used their thorns to keep weeds and pests away. When eaten together, these three plants provided a complete nutritional profile that maintained soil fertility for generations. In the Great Lakes region, the Ojibwe people operated a sophisticated economy based on wild rice, which they called monomin. This wasn't just gathering what they found. It was a managed environment led by tribal elders who monitored the health of the lakes to prevent overharvesting. Further west, in the Great Basin, the tribes faced some of the harshest droughts on the continent. While outsiders saw a wasteland, these people saw an opportunity in the massive swarms of Mormon crickets. They didn't just catch a few insects, they engineered massive cricket drives. By digging long, crescent-shaped trenches and using the natural behavior of the insects, they could harvest up to 273,000 calories in a single hour of effort. That is a caloric return on investment 10 times higher than hunting a deer and 200 times higher than gathering seeds. They ground these crickets into a high-protein flour that could sustain a whole tribe through a multi-year drought. One of the most remarkable survival foods ever created was pemmican. On the Great Plains, survival in the bitter cold required massive amounts of lipids, or fats. To get this, they practiced a process called bone grease rendering. At sites like the Mitchell Prehistoric Indian Village, we find specialized zones where people pulverized the ends of long bones and boiled them to extract every ounce of grease. This grease was mixed with dried meat and berries. The result was a food that was almost indestructible. Traditional pemmican could stay shelf-stable for decades. It provided nearly 3,800 calories per pound. To put that in perspective, a single pound of pemmican has as much energy as a full day of modern military rations, but with much higher levels of natural antioxidants. The science didn't stop at meat. In the Pacific Northwest, the camas bulb was a primary staple. However, in its raw form, this bulb contains inulin, which the human stomach cannot digest. To make it edible, the tribes engineered massive pit ovens. These were deep holes lined with heated stones and damp vegetation. The bulbs were slow cooked for up to 3 days. This process, known as thermal hydrolysis, broke the complex carbohydrates down into sweet fructose. It turned a useless root into a calorie-dense treat that could be dried and stored for years. Storage was just as important as the harvest. To keep their food safe from enemies and animals, they built bell-shaped cache pits. These were engineered with a very narrow neck, about 1 meter wide, to make them easy to hide under a layer of dirt. Below the surface, they belled out into large chambers lined with clay to keep out moisture and pests. These pits were so effective at removing moisture that they prevented the growth of dangerous bacteria like botulism. A single pit could hold hundreds of pounds of corn and dried meat, acting as a hidden bank account of energy for the winter months. This level of nutritional independence made the tribes incredibly resilient. Archaeological evidence suggests that prior to the disruption of their food systems, many individuals lived very long lives, sometimes reaching over 100 years old. Their diet was incredibly diverse, often consisting of over 300 different types of foods. They were statistically taller and healthier than many of the soldiers and settlers who first encountered them. This wasn't because of luck, it was because of active resource management. They used controlled burns to clear forests and encourage the growth of berry bushes and grazing lands for deer and buffalo. They were not just living off the land, they were engineering it. However, by the middle of the 1800s, this nutritional independence became a target. Military leaders like William T. Sherman and Philip Sheridan realized that as long as the tribes had their food systems, they could not be forced onto reservations. They began a policy of resource annihilation. This is often called scorched earth tactics. In the Southwest, this took a devastating turn. In 1863, Kit Carson was ordered to subdue the Navajo. Instead of fighting a traditional war of battles, he targeted their livelihood. His men marched through Canyon de Chelly and cut down more than 5,000 peach trees. They burned cornfields and slaughtered over 1,000 sheep in a single raid. The goal was to make the land so inhospitable that the people had no choice but to surrender or starve. On the Great Plains, the focus was the buffalo. For centuries, the buffalo jump had been a miracle of community engineering. A single runner could trick 50 tons of meat into falling off a cliff, providing 20,000 pounds of meat in an afternoon. That was enough to feed a tribe of 100 people for months. But by the 1860s, the buffalo migratory patterns were being disrupted by the railroad and new settlements. The United States government saw the disappearance of the buffalo as a strategic advantage. While there is a debate among historians about whether there was a formal written extermination policy, the actions of the time speak clearly. The military allowed commercial hunters to use their forts as bases and provided them with free ammunition. From 1872 to 1874, millions of buffalo were killed for their hides alone, leaving the meat to rot on the prairie. General Sherman's intent was clear when he suggested the Army should support the hunters until the buffalo were gone. By 1883, the last major buffalo hunt took place on the northern plains. The meat factory was officially closed. The loss of the buffalo and the destruction of the farms led to a total collapse of the traditional food systems. By 1890, the year of the Wounded Knee tragedy, many tribes were facing widespread starvation. They were forced to rely on government rations of white flour, sugar, and lard. This was a massive shift from a diet of 300 diverse nutrient-dense foods to just a few highly processed staples. This transition is what some historians call nutritional colonization. The high-protein, high-fiber diets that had sustained these nations for thousands of years were replaced by foods that the human body was not evolved to handle in such large quantities. This history is preserved in the stories of people like Maxadewiak, also known as Buffalo Bird Woman. She was born in 1839 and grew up in a traditional earth lodge beside the Knife River. She was a seed keeper, a woman who held the sacred knowledge of how to plant and maintain 9 different varieties of corn. Even as the world changed around her, she refused to plant the turnips the government provided. She believed her traditional seeds were superior because they were part of her tribe's heritage and biological history. In 1917, she worked to record her gardening techniques, ensuring that the engineering knowledge of her era would not be lost forever. She described how she used a bison scapula hoe and an antler rake to coordinate with her neighbors. They were so careful that they prevented different types of corn from cross-pollinating, essentially maintaining a genetic database of their crops. Because of people like her, many of these heirloom seeds survived. Today, there is a movement to plant these seeds again and return to the food systems that once provided such incredible health and strength. The story of how Native Americans survived is not a story of people barely hanging on. it is a story of elite environmental engineering. It is the story of the Cheyenne horn bow, a weapon made of boiled bighorn sheep horn and hoof glue that was as powerful as a modern 70-pound compound bow. It is the story of the snapping turtle string, a bowstring made from turtle neck skin that was famous for its strength. These were a people who turned cricket plagues into gold mines and bones into high-energy fuel. They built a civilization on the back of a deep scientific understanding of the natural world. When we look back at the 1800s, we often see the smoke of the battlefields. But the real history was often happening in the cash pits, the peach orchards, and the cornfields. It was a war of resources, where the ability to store 100 pounds of meat underground was just as important as the ability to ride a horse. The resilience of these food systems is a testament to the ingenuity of the people who created them. Even after the scorched earth campaigns and the loss of the buffalo, the knowledge survived in the hair of women who hid seeds during forced marches, and in the oral histories passed down through generations. The lessons from these traditional food systems are still being studied by scientists today. They are looking at the phenolic concentrations in heirloom corn and the omega-3 levels in traditional fish harvests. They are finding that the primitive methods of the past were often more advanced than the industrial methods of today. The history of the American West is much more than just a series of conflicts. It is a long-running record of human brilliance in the face of nature's greatest challenges. It is a reminder that true sovereignty and independence always begin with the ability to feed your own people. What part of the Three Sisters biological engine do you think is the most impressive? And do you believe modern farming could learn something from these ancient techniques? Let me know in the comments below.